Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras.
And I'm Lauren Izzo. There are just hours until the U.S. election comes to an end. We have a lot of exciting topics to cover tonight. This is ILTV's U.S. Election 2020 special.
So stay tuned.
Now, as you probably know, it's November 3rd, voting day.
Yeah, and the nominees, Republican incumbent President Donald Trump and Democratic former Vice President Joe Biden, are now closing out their campaigns, trying to galvanize as many voters as possible before the deadline tonight.
President Trump having spoken last to swing voters in Michigan, while Biden headed to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. When you draw crowds like this is not the crowd of somebody that's going to lose the state of Michigan.
A little concerned. It's a tight race, especially in the state of Florida. We know it's real close, so there's some pivotal states that are important for Biden to put him over the top. So a little finger biting, a little nervous right now, but hopefully he'll prevail in the end.
Millions of Americans have already voted, close to 100 million, and millions more will vote tomorrow. And my message to you is simple. The power to change this country is in your hands. In your hands.
Now, let's get a sense for what's happening on the ground in the United States. We're joined by journalist Tel Heinrich in New York City. Thank you, Tel, for joining us. Well, you know, it's a big day for democracy in the U.S. and also one of the most heated elections we've ever seen. What is the atmosphere where you are right now? Is it just another election day?
It's very true, Lauren. Listen, voting day, election day is supposed to be an exciting day, a celebration of democracy. It comes once every 4 years, just like the Olympics. Well, not this year, but you know what I mean. And I'm under the feeling that many people in the U.S. this time, they just can't wait for this period to be over because the atmosphere is heavily charged. It's taking an emotional and mental toll on people, and they just can't wait for it to be over. Each side that I'm talking to keeps telling me that they are sure that the other side will not concede and will take it to court battles and dispute the election results. And then when I talk to Democrats and I talk to Republicans, each side is also very much convinced that their candidate will for sure win the elections if it's not for, unfairness, let's put it this way, if tricks are not played, if the process is fair. So it just shows you to what extent people do not trust the system. They don't trust the process, and they're trying to delegitimize it. And some will tell you that it's setting the ground for court battles, for protests, for a scenario of violence and looting that we've seen over recent months. And it's all very concerning. You can already see how stores in Los Angeles, in New York, and Washington are boarding up with plywood and preparing for the worst.
Well, it's funny that you talk about this division and this, the election results, because let's talk about this unscalable fence now being erected around the White House. Is that to keep people out and protect the president ahead of the elections, or maybe to keep people in?
No, I'm pretty sure it's definitely to keep people out. And by the way, we've already seen some reports here in the U.S. claiming that groups like Antifa, for example, are organizing in advance. And I think no matter what the results will be, some people will find a reason to protest or to riot, I should probably say.
Tal, what about voting? The pandemic has really changed the way people are coming out to vote in this election. How long is it going to take, to actually find out who the winner of this election is?
Well, it's a good question, Lauren. Unless we have a landslide, the assumption is that it will take some time because COVID has changed voting patterns in this country. We heard Joe Biden speaking in the soundbite before. He said that around 100 million people have already cast their ballots prior to Election Day in early voting. And we're talking here about three different patterns of voting. In the early days of the early voting, we know that more Democrats were turning out. And now, come Election Day and towards Election Day, the later days of early voting, it was more Republican Republican dominant, I guess we can say. That's the assumption. And then later we'll have the mail-in ballots, some of them which will be counted after Election Day. It depends on which states. Each state has different rules, according to Supreme Court, by the way, decisions in that sense as well. So I think we will have to wait unless we have a landslide win tonight.
All right, Tal Heinrich, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, in the last 4 years, Trump's administration has pushed several policies in favor of Israel, including moving their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in 2018.
While American Jews are largely in favor of Joe Biden, according to the polls, here in Israel, Donald Trump is the overwhelming favorite. Nittany Manson reports.
The U.S. election is reverberating around the world, and here in Israel, the name on everyone's lips is Donald Trump. Not necessarily because he's the best candidate or the most popular, but he's arguably implemented more for Israel than virtually any other U.S. administration. On Monday, Jewish settler leaders prayed at the Cave of the Patriarchs in the West Bank for the U.S. president to be re-elected over former Vice President Joe Biden in the highly contentious 2020 election.
והגענו פה לברך את הנשיא טראמפ גם על העבר, להודות לו, אבל גם על העתיד. שיהיה לו הצלחה במערכת הבחירות הקרובות.
The Trump administration had named the Israeli-Arab rapprochement that it had been brokering the Abraham Accords. In addition to negotiating normalization with the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan, he declared Jerusalem the undivided capital of Israel in 2017. And last year, he declared Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Earlier this year, Trump presented a peace plan for Israel and the Palestinians, which was quickly dismissed as one-sided. Still, the pro-Trump camp in Israel remains supportive of another term for Trump.
I'm hoping that what we're going to see in the next day, Trump is going to get reelected, and he is going to start his road to peace across the world, not just in the Middle East with the 3 peace plans that he did. He's going to do it across the world.
Former Vice President Democrat Joe Biden isn't necessarily considered a threat to the U.S.-Israel relationship, but it is clear that pro-Trump Israelis are much more vocal about their support. Nittany Manson, ILTV.
Okay, well, I'm Canadian, but Aaron, are you still undecided about the election?
All right, well, my opinion does not matter, but if you are undecided still at home, you're not alone. And that is why we now turn to our wonderful panel who braved coronavirus to come to the studio and join us today.
Starting with former Israeli diplomat and expert on Israel-American relations, Nadav Tamir, and founder and president of the Jerusalem Washington Center and author of the book Broken Values, Gideon Israel.
And we also have Israeli journalist, author, and attorney Ben-Dror Yamini. And finally, last but not least, Yael Patir, the former director of J Street Israel. Thank you all so much for being with us today. All right, so my first question, I'm just going to swing back to Israeli-American voters that we saw. Recently, we saw all the polls coming out saying that Israeli voters typically are voting for Trump, while the American Jewish voters are typically voting for Biden. Why is that? Why is it breaking down that way? Yeah, I'm going to start with you.
You need a long answer for that, but I think the bottom line is that the Trump administration has aligned itself with the current Israeli government, with a right-wing agenda, which is a popular stand for Israelis, which is why you see popularity for the president, who's considered to be, the Israeli government's best friend, and with American Jews, you see, as they do, for many, many years now, support for the Democratic candidate, and 70% support.
Nadav, I know that you're among the Israeli minority voting for Biden. Why do you think that the majority of Israelis are wrong?
Because I think Trump is bad for the world, is bad for America, and is bad for Israel. I don't think he's leading the free world as America should. I think Israel needs America that leads the world and is respected by the world, and Trump is not. I think he, on the most existential issues, he made the situation worse. Iran is closer to a bomb. The Palestinian issue, he completely made himself irrelevant. And in terms of Syria, you see that the future of Syria will be decided between Turkey, Iran, and Russia. The U.S. is completely not there.
So I do want to touch on, the policies that Trump has implemented for Israel, specifically the Abraham Accords. So we have normalization agreements with 3 countries so far. Apparently, there could be up to 10 more. I wonder if you think that the same thing would happen with Biden. If he's elected, will he continue with these kind of agreements? And will we see the same sort of dynamic of the Israel-U.S. relationship, Mr. Yamini?
I wish I could say yes, but I cannot say yes because probably he's not going to follow the same line of Trump. But the main problem, as much as I see it, and it has something to do also with the Israeli society, with Israeli politics. The main problem in what I see in the United States is we are losing the center. No center anymore. We have right-wingers, we have left-wingers. Where is the center? I mean, every democratic liberal society, the backbone of such a society must be the center. And we don't have it anymore. I mean, when I visit in the United States, I know, and I give many lectures, I just know one thing. I cannot say one word about Trump, not in favor of him, not against him, because it became the most delicate issue. And people are becoming more and more extremist to both sides, which is terrible. I don't want it to happen here. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen somehow already, but that's the main phenomena that we see. That's why people have to shield themselves and not to celebrate tomorrow. That's what we all see.
If we even have a result by tomorrow.
Don't you think the president has played a role in making it so?
I think in Hebrew we say tirlul. In English we don't have the right word. Maybe kind of walk insanity, or I don't know how to translate it. It's not easy. But he did not begin. I mean, I'm not a big supporter of Trump. It's not the story. But the whole story began actually with this kind of lady in the Washington Post who said that she is coming from liberal arts university, you know, very progressive. And she said, I cannot say any more Merry Christmas because people are going to be made. And she said it something like 5 years ago. That's why I'm going to vote for Trump.
Really
I mean, so something happened.
And that's really the extreme of political correctness, really. But, you know, Gideon, I know that you've written pretty extensively on this topic. What happened to the disappearing center, as Ben Drol has pointed to?
Well, I think regarding the Democratic Party, it's important to note that if you want to call it the radicalization or the Democrats going to the extreme, happened before Trump even stepped on the stage. What happened in 2016 with the Bernie Sanders movement was the culmination of a decade or a generation of young people in America being educated in a different way, not on traditional American values and various other things. It's possible that Trump has accelerated the extremism on the Democratic side, but he wasn't the one who created it.
I do want to bring up Trump's peace plan for a second with the Palestinians. You know, Trump has alienated the Palestinian Authority from any communication since he declared that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. This question is for you, Nadav. Do you think that a Biden administration could potentially bring the Palestinians back to the negotiating table?
Absolutely. I think it wasn't just Jerusalem. Even before he closed the Palestinian office in Washington, he stopped financing for UNRWA and for USAID project in the West Bank. And then, of course, the Jerusalem move. And the whole plan was a plan only with the Israelis. How do you aspire to do a peace plan with only one side? I think Biden, who's, by the way, a great supporter of Israel and far from any extremism or radicalism. He is the middle of the road guy. As a senator, he always used to cross the aisle and work with the Republicans. He's far from the extremism that people here describe for the Democratic Party. And he will be able to, I think, bring the Palestinians back to the table. And I think he will also support the normalization of Israel in the region, but not in a way to avoid the Palestinian issue, but to actually help solve the Palestinian issue.
But I want to follow up on that.
I want to disagree. Not that I'm against peace. I'm supporting any kind of peace plan that was on the table. I'm supporting. The point is that we cannot forget the fact that before Trump, we had Bill Clinton. Before Trump, we had Obama. And peace plans with something like 97% of the territories Israeli withdrawal was on the table. They always said no. Let's not forget it. So it has nothing to do with Trump. It has nothing. I mean, Palestinians are not willing to have the two states for two people solution. They are not. I mean, it's not me who is saying it, it's the Palestinians who are saying it.
So who is more likely
the
to
Israeli
make...
government is also not willing to go to a two-state solution. But the question is whether an American president can be a better broker between the sides than the current president. And President Biden will be that.
I'm not defending the Israeli government because I'm not supporting the Israeli policy in the settlements and so on and so on. But when we had the chance to achieve peace, it was the Palestinians who repeatedly said no.
I think it's important to note that Trump hasn't alienated the Palestinians. He's shown them to be irrelevant in the region. They're just, for the past 20, 30 years, the conventional wisdom was that the Palestinians are the center. That's the cauldron. From there emanate all the problems in the Middle East. And Trump has come with a different outlook, and it's shown that the conventional wisdom is wrong. He's shown them to be irrelevant, and that movement can be made with other countries throughout the region, peace and better relationships. And I think that's what Trump has shown. It's not that he's alienated them; they're just not relevant.
Can I say
I
something
have
about
to jump on that because, yeah, I mean, the status quo has obviously changed.
So let me just say, okay, that I live in Israel and travel around the country, and Palestinians are very relevant to my region. So making them irrelevant is actually a great danger for Israel.
He's shown
because they're extremely relevant, and I think the right approach, as Nadav said, to normalizing relations with Israel in the region is to use it as leverage.
Well, I think we have to separate between the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian citizenry. And what I believe has happened is a change in the status quo in terms of no progress in terms of peace and normalization agreements between Israel and Arab countries until the Palestinian issue has been resolved, and that has been circumvented.
Right.
Now,
I mean, that's a development that has already been in play for several years now. I mean,
but even many Arab states, including, and leaders of the Arab world have come out and said, the frozen movement between Israel and the Palestinians has forced our hand.
Right, and it will no longer sort of be what we will be waiting for, right, is what we heard from the Emirates. But what I'm saying is that is a development that people who are engaged in this topic and who are trying to promote Israel's relations with its neighbor know that this is already in play. The things that have been, this normalization has been happening under the table, and now it's on the table. And that's a wonderful thing for Israel's security, for Israel's relationships in the region, and for our prosperity, undoubtedly. But I'm just saying that it has already been the case. And this normalization, I would have liked it to be, would have been, again, leverage to actually reverse that course.
So is there a chance that this could potentially be something positive for the Palestinians, and the Abraham Accords could be essentially a back door to some kind of an agreement between the Israelis and Palestinians?
I mean, I think that is the hope. I mean, the hope is that going forward with this process, and perhaps the ability to bring in Saudi Arabia, right, which is, I think, the big sort of trophy for Israel, would come in exchange for some positive development vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And I want to say, I don't think that either side, Israelis or Palestinians, at this moment are ready for a peace deal, definitely not for a final status deal, but there's so much that could be done to better the relationship between the sides and to make progress towards something that could be an agreement in the future. And I hope the next American administration will do that.
All right, well, for my final question today, Ben Dror, I'm actually going to come back to you. Many people have alluded to, of course, the ties between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. Would those closeness of ties between Israel and the United States be any different under a Biden presidency?
Would it look more like when the Obama administration was in power?
Yes, I guess yes, because personal relationships are part of the game. I mean, we have to admit it. I mean, he has his own, even if I'm not a big supporter of Netanyahu, yes, he has this kind of personalities and this kind of very special relationship with Trump. I'm not sure that he's going to have it with Biden. We know exactly what happened in the term of Barack Obama. So it's going to be something like what we already experienced before. I do agree with Nadav that Biden is not an enemy of Israel. I mean, he is not maybe Trump, but he is not an enemy of Israel. I mean, in all his votes, not only him, also Kamala Harris. I mean, they always voted in favor of Israel. So I'm not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of the renewing the two peace plans or normalization with Israel. I only said just one thing, that we, people who are supporting peace, let's not delude ourselves that there is any chance that something will happen just because it's going to be Biden, or that the old offers will be on the table again.
I think
that's all.
I think you just need to ask yourself. You need to ask yourself, when you're looking at the next administration in vis-a-vis Israel, you have to ask, who do you want sitting in the room? Do you want Mike Pompeo, David Friedman, and Mike Pence, or do you want James Zogby, Bernie Sanders, and Jeremy Ben-Ami?
I think the bottom line here is that, no candidate is going to be bad for Israel, but depending on the candidate, it might affect, the region.
No, but it depends how you define what's good for Israel. Sure. Because one of the things that always worked for Israel was the bipartisan support. And in the last decade, Netanyahu and Trump made it even worse, made the relations only in one side of the politics. And I think Biden can bring the relations to a bipartisan approach where also sane Republicans, middle-of-the-road Republicans can support, because it made the relations toxic, and it moved many of the Democratic Party away from Israel, and also the majority of the Jewish community, the American Jewish community, away from Israel. And we should bring it together, and I think Biden can do it.
And we did hear, by the way, Yair Lapid sort of criticizing Netanyahu for not maintaining a relationship with the Democrats, with the Biden camp. So unfortunately, we will have to end on that note. Ben-Dror Yamini, Gideon Israel, Gael Patir, Nadav Tamir, thank you all.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you so much for coming. Well, in 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice charged 12 Russian intelligence officers with hacking Democratic officials amid the 2016 presidential election that saw Donald Trump win his first term in office, accusing them of using spear phishing emails and malicious software.
Yeah, the hackers also allegedly stole data of 500,000 voters from a state election board website. And the Kremlin, on their part, is saying that there was no evidence linking the 12 accused to intelligence or hacking, claiming it was also a conspiracy scheme. Now, the United States claims that they are being more vigilant in order to stop interference this time around. But already, several reports of breaches are leading up to today's vote.
All right, let's hear more about this from Ram Levy, cyber expert and CEO of Confidas. Thank you, Ram, for joining us. So, how can we compare what's happening this year to what happened back in 2016? And what exactly was done after that election to prevent it from happening again?
Well, I think in 2016, people did not anticipate the extent of how much foreign interference can affect the elections. Now we understand that it can be done much more vigilantly. And the United States has taken a lot of steps, including establishing a special task force within the Department of Homeland Security. The Cyber Command has been taking down Russian infrastructure. A lot has been done.
Well, so do you suspect that it's largely the same foreign actors as in 2016? Can you give us, any examples of some of the recent hacks in the 2020 election?
Well, we're seeing three major actors: China, Russia, and Iran. Iran has been actively trying to manipulate voters. Russia has been actively employing different types of infrastructure, I think very sophisticated infrastructure. In China, of course, China wants Trump out of office. Russia wants Trump inside office, and Iran, of course, wants Trump out of office. But all of them are trying to destabilize democracy. I think that's the common denominator between the three.
All right, well, Ram, I know that we have so much that we need to pay attention to ahead of this election, but thank you so much for shedding some light on it.
Thanks, Ram.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight, winter is coming again, and rain season is beginning. Tonight will be partly cloudy with showers and a low of 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius.
Tomorrow will be a high of 71 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. Really cooling down.
Oh yeah, and now, of course, before we go, we're going to keep being cool by taking a look at what's going viral in Israel.
Go Democrat.
It's a puppy for Trump.
Wait, why is he growling?
Oh, it's a kitty for Harris.
Oh my gosh. It's a dog running with a Trump cape.
Aww.
All those animals exercising their democratic right.
That's true. Be like dogs and cats.
Yes.
All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.41 shekels to the American dollar.
And 2.6 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Lauren Izzo.
And I'm Aaron Porras. And remember, you are not your vote. And though you may disagree with people near you, they are not your enemy. No matter what happens tomorrow, the fact is that the fight is being decided at the ballot boxes, where it should be, and it should be celebrated that way. Thank you so much for watching.
Have a good one.